Tonight, I'm going to share some truly terrifying stories about people who discovered they weren't alone. These are real accounts from people who experienced that heart-stopping moment when they realized someone was outside. Our first story takes place in a small suburban neighborhood. Sarah was 16 when her parents went away for the weekend, leaving her home alone for the first time. Their house was in a quiet cul-de-sac where nothing bad ever happened. The first night went fine. Sarah ordered pizza, watched movies, and FaceTimed with friends. Around midnight, she locked up and went to bed. At 3:17 a.m., she woke to a strange scratching sound coming from her bedroom window. At first, she thought it was just tree branches, but their trees had been trimmed recently. The scratching continued, methodical and deliberate. Then came a soft tapping. Sarah froze, unable to move as her heart pounded. The tapping increased in intensity, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to slide her window open. Sarah grabbed her phone and crawled under her bed, calling 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher told her to stay hidden and that officers were on their way. For 7 excruciating minutes, Sarah listened as the person outside systematically tried each lock on her window. Then came silence. Sarah thought maybe they'd given up, until she heard footsteps on the back porch, followed by the sound of someone testing the kitchen door handle. When police arrived 4 minutes later, they found fresh footprints outside every window and door. A ladder from their shed had been placed against the side of the house, right below Sarah's bedroom. Most disturbing of all, the security camera had been turned to face the wall. Police later arrested a 42-year-old man who lived 3 streets over. He'd been watching Sarah for weeks, waiting for her parents to leave. In his garage, they found detailed notes about her schedule, copies of her house keys, and a backpack containing duct tape, rope, and a hunting knife. Sarah's story reminds us that danger can lurk even in the safest neighborhoods. Our second story comes from Michael, a 28-year-old who moved into a remote cabin to work on his novel. The property was perfect, 20 acres of forest, no neighbors for miles, and absolute silence. For the first 2 weeks, Michael was productive and at peace. Then one night, while working late, he heard what sounded like someone walking around his porch. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, circling the entire cabin. Michael convinced himself it was just a deer or some other wildlife. But the next night, the footsteps returned, this time accompanied by a low, rhythmic humming. Michael grabbed his flashlight and looked out the window. In the beam of light, he saw nothing. But when he turned off the flashlight and let his eyes adjust to the darkness, he could make out a figure standing at the edge of the trees, completely motionless. The figure appeared each night after that, always in the same spot, just watching. Michael called the local sheriff, who came out but found nothing except some odd footprints that didn't match any known wildlife. One morning, Michael woke to find small items rearranged in his cabin. A coffee mug moved from the cabinet to the counter, his laptop opened when he'd closed it, his jacket hanging on a different hook. The final straw came when he returned from a grocery run to find his manuscript pages scattered across the floor, with 3 words written in dirt on his kitchen table: "I see you." Michael packed his things and left that day. 3 months later, he read a news story about the arrest of a man living in an underground bunker less than half a mile from his former cabin. The man had been squatting on the property for years, unknown to anyone, and had built an elaborate network of tunnels. Inside, police found journals detailing his observations of every person who had lived in the cabin over the past decade. Our third story comes from a college student named Amber. During winter break, most students had gone home, leaving her dorm building nearly empty. Amber stayed behind to work extra shifts at her job. One night around 11 p.m., she was in her room studying when she heard a knock at her door. Thinking it was the RA, she opened it without checking, but no one was there. She looked down the hallway in both directions, completely empty. Assuming it was just her imagination, Amber went back to studying. 20 minutes later, another knock, slightly louder. Again, she opened the door to an empty hallway. This time, she felt uneasy and double-checked that her door was locked before returning to her desk. The third knock came an hour later, now a pounding that made her jump. Amber was genuinely frightened and called campus security. While waiting for them to arrive, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of someone softly trying her doorknob, testing if it was locked. Security arrived within minutes, but found no one in the building. They checked the cameras and discovered something chilling. The footage showed a man in a dark hoodie entering the building through a propped open door. He would approach Amber's door, knock, then hide around the corner to watch as she opened it. The third time, after she called security, he had tried the doorknob before running down the stairwell. The most disturbing part? Campus police recognized him. He wasn't a student, but had been issued multiple trespassing warnings for lurking around female dorms. In his car, parked nearby, they found rope, duct tape, and printed photos of Amber taken through her window. Our fourth story involves a family living in a suburban home. Mark and Jennifer had just moved in with their 2 children, excited about the spacious backyard and friendly neighborhood. Their first few months were perfect until Jennifer started noticing small things out of place. Garden tools rearranged, a lawn chair moved, footprints in the flower beds. Mark dismissed her concerns, blaming wind or neighborhood kids. One night, their motion sensor light kept triggering. Mark checked multiple times but saw nothing. At 2 a.m., it happened again. Frustrated, he went downstairs, determined to fix the sensor. When he opened the blinds to look outside, he came face to face with a man standing inches from the window, staring directly at him. Mark yelled, and the man bolted. Police responded quickly, but found no one. They did, however, discover something horrifying. Underneath the deck was a makeshift sleeping area with food wrappers, bottles, and a notebook containing detailed observations about the family's daily routines. The writings dated back to before they had even moved in, suggesting he had been watching the house, waiting for new occupants. The final entry in the notebook was especially chilling. "Tonight is the night I come inside." Investigators later connected the case to a string of home invasions in the area where families were attacked while sleeping. The suspect was never caught and remains at large. Our last story comes from James, who inherited his grandparents' farmhouse in rural Montana. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the property was surrounded by dense woods. James moved in during fall and spent weeks renovating. As winter approached, he began hearing strange noises at night. Scratching at the windows, footsteps on the porch, and occasional tapping on the glass. One evening, while working in the basement, the power suddenly went out. James grabbed his flashlight and went to check the circuit breaker. As he passed the kitchen window, his light briefly illuminated a face peering in, pale, gaunt, with wide, unblinking eyes. James called the police, but being so remote, they wouldn't arrive for at least 40 minutes. While waiting, the tapping on windows increased, moving systematically around the house. Then came the sound of someone trying each door handle. James barricaded himself in a bedroom with his shotgun. Through the window, he could see a figure circling the house, occasionally pressing against the glass to look inside. Most disturbing was the person's behavior, methodical, patient, almost ritualistic. When police finally arrived, they found footprints in the snow circling the entire property. The breaker box had been deliberately tampered with. Most chilling of all, they discovered a small hidden camera in the living room bookshelf that hadn't been installed by James or his grandparents. The camera led investigators to identify the intruder as a former caretaker who had worked for James's grandparents years earlier. He had been watching the property for months, waiting for the right moment. In his cabin 15 miles away, police found monitors displaying feeds from multiple cameras hidden throughout James's house. These stories remind us that sometimes that feeling of being watched isn't just paranoia. Sometimes there really is someone outside. Lock your doors, check your windows, and maybe think twice before investigating that strange noise in the middle of the night. Stay safe, and thanks for listening.
Subscribe to my channel!